So there we are. So I think what we need to do now is to welcome Mr. Mona, our speaker this evening, and just say we look forward very, very much to his talk.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's nice to be here again, because I did talk about one of these books about 3 or 4 years ago, and I had a very pleasant time and great company, so I'm looking forward to that again tonight. The Levant before the Pax Ottomana, Nicola Martoni's pilgrimage. Now, in 1394, Nicola Martoni set off on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land from the south of Italy, and he kept a diary in Latin, and I translated it, and that's this. Who was he? Well, this way. Oh no. There we go. He was a lawyer. This picture is about 30 years before Martoni, but I don't think things will have changed very much. This is him here, taking down the will of a dying person. And that was probably a lot of his bread and butter, taking wills, marriage settlements, property contracts, that sort of thing. In Latin. It's not a very good Latin. It's a very decadent Latin. It's halfway between Latin and, I won't say Italian, because there were so many different types of Italian. The one we're more familiar with is the one of Florence, of Dante, but his was Neapolitan dialect. So it's halfway between Latin and his dialect. He was a little man. We know this because he nearly drowns because he's littler than everybody else jumping off the ship. I think by the standards of southern Italian in the 14th century, that probably meant he was pretty little. He was also, and what is most endearing, he was short-sighted. It tells us this on the first page. He said he's going on a ship and he sees some mountain or other, and he said, all the pilgrims go and look at that and admire. I can't see it because I'm short-sighted. So he was probably about 40 years of age. He was married, had 2 children, 2 sons who died, unfortunately. He was educated, obviously, because he had Latin. In the days before printing, before the Renaissance, before the scientific revolution, and so on and so on. He lived at about the same time as Chaucer. So where does he get his information from when he's travelling? Where does he get it? From the Bible, from word of mouth, by such manuscripts as he managed to read or get hold of. His brother was an archdeacon of a town near his, called Caserta, which is a bishopric. So he probably got some manuscripts and from his brother. There we go. Modern map, that's where he lived. Carinola. It was a village just north of Naples. Here is the port of Gaeta, where he sets off from, and it's also the capital of the King of Naples. Because not content with having one King of Naples, they have 2. He lives in this area here under King Ladislaus, where somebody from Ladislaus's family, another Aragonese family, with the sponsorship of the King of France, has tried to invade Naples and take over. And the brother, and this cousin just has Naples around there. So they have two kings ruling at the same time, constantly bickering, trying to poison each other, and then fighting each other. The music you heard was written at this time by contemporaries of Nicola, one in Caserta, just here, and two in Gaeta. And their music has survived and is played. Now this is Carinola today. It's quite a small village, so 600 years ago it would have been even smaller. And this, he lived in a house something like this. This is the oldest house in Carinola. It's a medieval house. All amenities, including parking for your donkey cart. And he had a chapel in there, in his house, dedicated to Saint Catherine, with whom he was very fond, and where his two sons were buried, and he hoped himself to be buried one day. St. Catherine, we'll just have a quick word about Catherine because she is important to him. This is a contemporary icon, St. Catherine of Alexandria, martyred in about 300, at the age of 18, imprisoned in Alexandria by the emperor because she wouldn't, because of converting to Christianity, and she was tortured on the wheel, hence our Catherine wheels, and she was beheaded, and her body flowed milk instead of blood. And angels took her body up and carried it to Mount Sinai, where it was discovered in about 1100, and now it rests in the monastery of St. Catherine in Sinai. There's no evidence that she ever existed, and she was probably a fable that was invented for the education of the faithful. But for Nicola and many other people, she's very real. Now he leaves. Nicola leaves in 1394 into this world. He's left here. He sets off from there. The Kingdom of Naples, the Papal States here, in those days they so loved the Pope that they had two, like the two kings of Naples. They had two. There was another Pope in Avignon, the anti-Pope, and France, Spain, Scotland supported the anti-Pope. England, Naples supported Naples supported the anti-Pope, and England supported the Roman Pope, along with most of the North Italian states. The Kingdom of Naples belonged to the family of Aragon here, a mountain state based in Saragossa, extended its kingdom to include Catalonia, Barcelona, the House of Barcelona. And they're very big players in this area. Sicily owes them vassalage and a lot of other islands. Genoa and Venice are important players, both maritime merchant cities with a slightly different approach, each of them. Genoa is only interested in trade. They're not interested in controlling lands, only if they are good port cities and commercial cities. They do have a powerful army. Genoese crossbowmen were very famous, fought at the Battle of Crecy, for example, against the English. And Venice, however, has a slightly different approach. They like to control territory. And we'll get to some of the territories they control a bit later on. Then we have the Ottoman Empire. It's not quite accurate, the person who did this map, because the Ottoman Empire didn't include this bit of Anatolia. We'll come to that later. And this area here is a complete patchwork of states which are either Byzantine or Latin, Catholic or Orthodox. And the Byzantines based here in Constantinople, and their biggest state is probably down here, and also the time up there. So that's the world he's sailing into in a ship like this. Quite small, about 15 meters, not very big at all. And it probably felt like being pilgrims sailing off, and this is from a fresco in Verona. So this is where he goes. This is where he goes. The boat goes round this way, avoiding the shortcut through the Straits of Messina, because Sicily has a king and queen who've only just defeated barons who owned the island and installed themselves, and there is still Catania here is being attacked by Martoni says Catalans, and I don't know which Catalans they were. They could have been supporters of the baron, one of the barons. They could have been Aragonese from Barcelona, Catalonia, or they could have belonged to the company, the Catalan company. And this was an army of mercenaries who for the last 150 years had been terrorizing this area. They would move into some territory, defeat the people there, set up base, milk it dry, and then they'd either be turfed out or they'd go on to somewhere else. The monks of Mount Athos here, here. The monks of Mount Athos, an independent sort of autonomous republic within Greece, until the year 2000 banned anybody from going if they were Catalan. So if you wanted to go and visit them, then you made sure you didn't wear a Barca shirt. And not only did they, this was at the sort of end of their 200 years of terror, and they'd sort of fragmented into little pirate gangs that hold out in these one of the 1,000 Greek islands, or several of the 1,000 Greek islands, and trade on shipping. Right, so he sails, we're avoiding this business here, we're going to go round here, past Malta, goes over Malta, belongs to Aragon, across this wide stretch here, past the Peloponnese, into the Cyclades, which at this time is owned by Venice, it's controlled by Venice, and this whole Cyclades is called the Duchy of the Archipelago. It was known by this name until the 19th century actually. You didn't go to the Cyclades, you went to the Archipelago, and everybody knew what you meant. Sails through there, we'll come back to these a bit later, to Rhodes. And Rhodes is a kind of gateway to the Holy Land, because here it's occupied by the Knights of St. John, the Hospitallers, who welcomed pilgrims. They put them up in big dormitories, they fed them, they kept the seaways clear between here and the Holy Land. They were fighting off Turks from here and there. So they were the last remnants of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In 1100, the First Crusade took the Holy Land, had a Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, And then Saladin, so many of you have heard of, Saladin threw them out in about 1190. And the Knights ended up by taking over a Byzantine island of Rhodes. Martoni could have gone, the classic pilgrimage voyage was, say if you wanted to go from here, from London, you went to Venice first, and then you got a Venetian ship to Rhodes, and then across to Jaffa, current Tel Aviv, which was the hop and the skip up to Jerusalem. But these chaps and many others went down to Alexandria because they wanted to visit the Monastery of St. Catherine and the shrines that are between Sinai and Jerusalem. So they went that sort of long way around. Now, just to explain, I mentioned this sort of patchwork of states in the Mediterranean, in the archipelago. And I want you to take you back, just for a couple of seconds, to explain how the reason for this Latin occupation of this territory. And this is broad brush before 1204, and the reason for that 1204 will become apparent in a minute. The Byzantines occupied all this area. They didn't. Actually, that's Cyprus. They didn't actually occupy that. That was somebody else. The Seljuk Turks, not the Ottomans, the Seljuk Empire, occupied the other half of Anatolia and came down here into not Palestine, but anyway, yes, Palestine. Syria, thank you very much. And then the Latins were basically around here. And then in 1204, as I said, that Saladin had thrown out the kingdom of the Latin kings of Jerusalem, and installed this belonged to the Saladin, the descendants of Saladin, called the Ayyubids, because Saladin's name was Ibn Ayyub, like his father, the Ayyubids, they occupied that territory. The Pope and the devout Crusaders wanted to get the Kingdom of Jerusalem back. So they set up the Fourth Crusade, which came by land and by sea, and they got to Venice, where they all got onto Venetian ships, and the idea was that they would go down to the Holy Land, but they took a little diversion to Constantinople. And there they captured Constantinople, massacred the population, their fellow Christians, or the schismatic Orthodox, tens of thousands of people were massacred, and carted off precious sculptures in whole buildings in Venice. St. Mark's Square, about half of St. Mark's Square, is pillars, sculptures, is looped from Constantinople in 1204. But mostly the Venetians profited from land. So this is, between 1204, this is the Latin Empire. So the Emperor of Constantinople, the Orthodox, retreated to Nicaea, and the Latin Emperor of Constantinople ruled from 1204 to 1261, and the Latin Empire took over all this territory, except for the Venetians, who took the prime real estate of Corfu, Cephalonia, Evia, bits and pieces around here, Crete and Rhodes. Then, after, in 1261, Michael Palaiologos VIII came back and he took back Constantinople. And the Latin Empire disintegrated into little states, fiefdoms, counties, dukedoms, run by basically warlords. Frankish, in other words, French, German, Crusaders, and Aragonese, the took over as well. So when Martoni is going through here, you have, but the other thing that happened was that the Seljuk Empire was attacked by the Mongols, and the Seljuk Empire collapsed. And there was into lots of what are called beyliks, emirates in Anatolia, one of which in Bithynia was run by somebody called Otto. And he was the founder of the Ottoman Empire, who took over the beyliks around here. They got into Thrace, Macedonia, and in this very year, 1394, came down into Thessaly. But there were still these independent Turkish emirates here, fighting each other, trying to raiding these people, but also trading with them. Here was a whole mishmash of Ottoman, yes, there's a few Ottoman, but Latin and Byzantine states. The Duchy of Athens, which included Thebes, the County of Kefalonia, Arta, tiny little, this thing in red was constantly being fought over. It changed hands about once every 2 years. And then you had the Byzantines, who had the Despotate of Arta here, the Despotate of Epirus here, and they managed to hold on to the Halkidiki, somewhat in the Black Sea. So, and the Knights of Rhodes have, the hospitals have roads. These were the main players at the time. Bayezid the First, Yildirim, which means lightning bolt or thunderbolt, called himself the Sultani Rum meaning Rome, saying he was a descendant or the successor to the Roman Empire. He came in 1389. Those of you who know your Serbian history will know about the Battle of Kosovo, Kosovo Polje, Blackbird Field, where the Ottomans, his father, Murad leading the Ottomans, and the Serbians fought to a standstill. Completely Pyrrhic victory and a Pyrrhic defeat. Bayezid's father was killed in that battle. He took the right wing, he survived. His younger brother took the left wing, and in good Ottoman fashion, when he succeeded after Kosovo, he strangled his brother, which is big. This was a tradition, as opposed to the Byzantine tradition, which is your siblings and your rivals you simply blinded, or poisoned, blinded and sent off to a monastery somewhere. So Bayezid took that whole, if you remember that swathe of Thessaly, it was down Thessaly that was in eastern Greece, and all over Thrace and Macedonia. He was the one who took it. This was Manuel II. He was the emperor of Byzantium, on very shaky ground. He was threatened on all sides, surrounded basically by the Ottomans, and he was constantly pleading for Western help. He went on in 1400, he went on an extended trip into Europe. And one of the places he went was Eltham Palace, which is 10 miles away. As the guest of Henry IV, where they laid on a tournament for him. He's the only Byzantine emperor ever to come to England. And the Doge of Venice. It's not a tremendously good likeness, but it was made in 1394, and the time that he went, so...
How do you know?
Well, that's true, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, it's 3 donations, so here's the Doge of Venice. And it was these three were the major sort of powers in the area, trying to keep control of these little bailics and emirates and despotates and principalities and dukedoms and so on. Right, here we are. We've come around here. We've gone through the archipelago, and we've come to Malta. Rhodes, I mean. Here's Rhodes. The Colossus stood through here. And then on to... here's a hospitaller who died in 1380. The hospitallers were knights and they were monks. Their whole vocation was a charitable one to pilgrims and also to non-pilgrims. Martoni talks about how it wasn't just Christians who were fed by them every day in Rhodes. They fed about 1,000 people a day. But they were definitely pretty warlike, and they wanted to be. Right, we're coming in now into Egypt. The Ayyubids had been had an army of military slaves called Mamluks. Mamluk is Arabic for property. But a few years before this, the Mamluks had revolted, thrown over the Ayyubids, and they now controlled all of Egypt and the Holy Land. So here you've got Alexandria here, and what we're going to do is going to go up the Nile to Cairo, across the Red Sea, down to St. Catherine's, which is here, back up to Gaza, and then to Jerusalem. Alexandria a bit later, but it hasn't changed much, I don't think. So the ships went into this port. That was the foreign ships, weren't allowed into that one, which was for locals, through that gate where they had their first encounter with what Martoni calls Saracens. The Mamluks were actually Turkish. They were a Turkic people who spoke Arabic, and they came from the Caucasus in Crimea. So they weren't, and they distinguished themselves from Arabs. Arabs were from the sort of Syria, and also from they included the Bedouin to the east. Went into Alexandria, stayed with the Italian consul, and all Christians stayed with their own national consuls, partly for kind of protection, but also because the consuls, like the embassies in Saudi Arabia now, have permission to import booze. It was basically the Italian brought in sorry?
services in Saudi Arabia.
Well, yes, there's this
Bringing those?
famous story before, about 30 years ago, where somebody phoned up the British ambassador or somebody there and said, I'm sorry, your grand piano, I'm afraid, is leaking. Can you come in?" So, it's not official, but the blind eye. So anyway, the Italian consul would bring in big barrel of wine a year and sell it off to the Christians at a great profit. But it was apparently very good wine. They also had their first encounter with the diversity of the Middle Eastern world of the Levant. And this is a little bit later, but I can't see that. But the way that Martoni describes the people in the street, they're very recognisable as tremendous variety of Christian, Muslim, and Arab peoples, distinguishable by their dress. He also wondered at the chicken hatcheries, and this is something actually that is described 200 years later in the Sultan's organ here. Is that the hatcheries were massive terracotta, like sort of tumblers that were glued around a charcoal fire. And they put eggs inside there, lit the charcoal fire, and hatched out lots of chickens. You bought chickens by the bucketful, chicks. And in every street corner there was somebody selling a bucket of chicks. So anyway, from Alexandria, let's see if anything else I want to point out. From Alexandria he goes up the Nile. Well, it's what we know as the Nile, because I told you before that he got all his information from the Bible, or most of it. Now, the original settlement of Cairo was around a fortress called the Babylon Fortress. And a suburb of Cairo is still called Babylonia, which is the Coptic suburb, the Coptic centre. So he thought he was going up the river to Babylon, so therefore this must have been the Tigris. So he's going up the Tigris to Babylon. Here he is, going up the Tigris, talking about these big snakes that have 4 feet and a big tail. You have to be careful of. And people along the banks coming out and waving at the boats and asking for bakshish. So he goes up the Nile. He has they get shipwrecked on the Nile, and he ends up swimming for his life onto a little island like this. And they get to the fortress of Babylon, which is this is a very famous Coptic church, which he did see, but he was for a time had been the seat of the patriarch of the Oriental Orthodox Church. The actual, when he went to, it was another church which is basically hidden by other buildings called St. Mercurios, which he does go and see. Anyway, Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox are not to be confused with the Oriental Orthodox are not to be confused with the Eastern Orthodox. The Eastern Orthodox, like Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, split from the West in the great schism in the 12th century, but the Oriental Orthodox split much earlier, in about 450 AD. Something called the Council of Chalcedon, and it's a sort of federation of Orthodox churches in Syria and Iraq, and also in India, the Thomist church, where St. Thomas was reported to go back. So Martoni talks about India and about how he's the patriarch of India. The thing is, in those days, India started just about east of the Holy Land. So it could include Syria. You don't know where they're talking about really. It could be Syria, it could be Iraq, and places further east until you get to India. But this is the rededication of St. Mercurios' church about 2 years ago with the Coptic patriarchs. Martoni is very impressed with the patriarch. Very simple, humble man who feeds a lot of people and gives away money from his income of the church. Nirvana receivers. Now, they would like to have seen the Emir of Cairo, the Sultan of Cairo, but he's off fighting Tamerlane, who is threatening Antioch down in the southeast. It also means, because the army's away, it means that the Arab Bedouin raiders are coming in and raiding the territories of Levant. So it means that they can't go and see. It's too dangerous to go and see the granaries of King Pharaoh. But you can just about glimpse the granaries of King Pharaoh from one of these towers. They're those, he says they're pyramidal in shape. It's where King Pharaoh, they store the grain in times of plenty, but they can't go and see them. So they set off across the Sinai. They have camels and mules, but I think a lot of them are walking. They're stocking up, and particularly stocking up on, Martoni's recommended to get a sweet cordial to put in the water. And the importance of this will become a bit later. Because they're walking in the middle of August across the Sinai until they get to St. Catherine. 5 of them die on the way, and they're the younger people who haven't been drinking their cordial. Because first of all, the cordial takes the taste of the water away. It's terrible, brackish water from the desert world. But secondly, presumably, I imagine it contains sugars and salts, which will keep you hydrated. So he survives. A couple of them are buried in the sands, and others they go. And they get to St. And they meet Bedouin on the way, as you do. The Arabs, as we all know, are descended from the family and armies of King Pharaoh, who were drowned in the Red Sea after Moses had gone through, and condemned by God to wander homeless ever since as a punishment. We get to St. Catherine's. You see the relics, venerate the relics. And then also go up the mountains to Mount Sinai, Mount Catherine, various shrines. Martoni has a bit of a problem getting up Mount Catherine because he's got malaria. He's on the 3rd day of tertian fever, malaria. And this is, end of August, so cut him a bit of slack. He says his legs have turned to tree trunks, and he can hardly make it, but it's faith that makes him go up. And then we get to Jerusalem, through the desert again, up to Jerusalem, the centre of his world and the centre of the world. If you look at maps of this time and earlier, we'll often have Jerusalem in the middle of the world map and everything else around it. I'm not going to talk much about these visits to the shrines of Jerusalem. Here's the Holy Sepulchre, which was the big one, the main one, because that's not in the context of our talk. But there are lots of fascinating glimpses into the pilgrim's life and experience in Jerusalem then. But I must show you this, my particular favourite. He went to see the tomb of Adam, the first man, which is just under Calvary. And so you go and worship Adam's tomb, and you get a plenary indulgence for this. Right, so Jerusalem. Let's see. This is all the city and all these sites are controlled by the Saracens. So sometimes they have to go. So sometimes they have to go and collect a key from an emir or from a guardian, and but they're mainly conducted by Franciscans. Right, so we're going to leave Jerusalem, and we're going to try and find a ship home. So here is, where is it? Al-Quba, Jerusalem, down to Jaffa, which is where Tel Aviv is, and he finds in Jaffa you can see the column where St. Paul was chained to which St. Paul was chained, and it's about all that's left of Jaffa because the Saracens have demolished the whole town so the Crusaders couldn't come back and occupy it again. And then he gets a boat to Beirut, where he nearly drowned, and then across to Cyprus. Why Cyprus? Well, Cyprus itself, the whole city, was taken off the Byzantines by Richard the Lionheart in the 12th century, and then sold to a French family called the Lusignans, who would also turn out to be kings of Jerusalem. But anyway, so it's the Lusignans who own Cyprus, except for the Genoese, who have come in about 3 years before our date. They've invaded Cyprus and pillaged it a little bit, and then they've kept hold of Famagusta. Famagusta, major trading port, big commercial centre. You can go there now, you still see these wonderful city walls and the castle over the port. And he is also particularly interested in going to a little island of Famagusta where St. Catherine grew up. And you would go into the ruins and see the ruins of her bedroom. So he's followed her whole life from that. He takes a side trip up into Cyprus, into the mountains where to Nicosia. Oh, there's Famagusta. Nicosia still has the Lusignan Cathedral of St. Nicholas, now mosque. But what he really wants to do is to go and see the cross of the good thief which is up a mountain, and you walk into the chapel, and here is the cross of the Buddha, it's suspended in midair without any form of support. So he does that, and he meets some Greeks on the way, takes advantage of the hospitality, and flees on the floor of the places where he has to sleep. The other reason, of course, is because it's Genoese, and he's hoping to get a ship back to Genoa. But no luck. So he goes back to Rhodes. From Rhodes he decides, down here somewhere, from Rhodes, on advice, he decides to go to Athens, where he might be able to get a ship, well, you almost certainly get a ship from Patras down here, and then you can hop along on a Venetian ship over to Italy. They're dodging pirates, sailing by night, storms, nearly swamped by storms. Finally come through to the east coast of Athens here, and then because of the danger of ambush, go on foot by night over the mountains to Athens, which, as you all know, was founded by Hadrian, who founded the city after he defeated the Trojans. But then they can't, it's too dangerous to go through there to Corinth and to Cephalonia, because the Duchy of Athens, until about 3 or 4 years ago, had been owned by the Catalans, this Catalan company, who had been ejected by an Aragonese, a Florentine family, which then became under the rule of the Duke of Athens, Ranieri, who was from Florence, and he just died. He had 2 daughters, one of which he'd married off to the Despotate of Morea, to the despot, a Byzantine. Another he married off to the Count of Cephalonia. And when he died, these 2 sisters and their husbands argued about who was going to inherit Athens. So they were fighting. And this became a complete battlefield all over here. They managed to, so instead he decided to go up to the Venetian town on Evia, Negropont it was called. They managed to dodge Albanians and Turks, get over from Oropos, and finally get over to Negropont, the capital, where it's a wonderful 6 weeks waiting for a boat. He says it's the greatest. He's purely Italian. Everybody speaks wonderful Italian. Beautiful women, very well dressed. And he's probably fainted as a pilgrim. But no ship, no Venetian ship, so they have to come back to Athens at night again. And then finally they go to Megara and get a boat to Corinth. And here's Corinth, and it has been occupied by Cephalonia, by the Duke and his wife, one of the daughters, and has been besieged by the army of the other daughter, who is married to the despot of Achaea. So at night they have to go, so they arrive at the port and they're guided through the lines, and now have to go up to Acrocorinth up here. And to beg for help in getting west. Well, I think the Cephalonians, or the sisters, have done some sort of deal to give her safe passage back to Cephalonia. So they all come down again, get in the ship, and go off through the Gulf of Corinth, past the different principalities, dodging Navarrese, who were another group like the Catalans from Levant, dodging the Catalans, dodging Turks, finally get to Patras and get on a boat to Corfu at last. Now, I'd be very impressed if you managed to follow all this, and not just because of my deficiencies in presentation, because it is a mess, a real mess. It's a patchwork of interests and armies, of families, dynasties, ruling armies. He's sort of waiting for somebody to step in and bring some order into this situation. And 50 years later comes the man, Mehmet the Conqueror, 1453, 29th of May, Tuesday, takes Constantinople, calls himself not the Sultan of Rome, but the Kaiser of Rome, the Emperor of Rome, and basically takes over all the Byzantine territories. So, by the death of Suleiman, the lawgiver, the Ottoman Empire looks like this, where they've taken all the old Byzantine territories, they've gone down, these beyliks, I think it's Bayezid, who had, under the threat of Tamburlaine, annexed these beyliks into one because Tamburlaine threatened to take them all over. They've thrown out well, the Mamluks are still there running the show, but they've they swear loyalty to the Ottomans along the coast. Little pockets of trouble like Algiers and Tunis. But basically this has become the Ottoman lake now. With the exception of our friends the Venetians, who have kept hold of Corfu, Cephalonia, Crete for the time being until the 17th century, and Cyprus. So, what have the Ottomans done for us? And are there any Greeks in here? If I'd be wearing a stab vest if I did the Greek audience. Under the Ottomans, they suppressed local warfare between these competing interests. They suppressed piracy and land raiding. It's interesting, if you go to Athens and the island of Aegina, you can go to a place called Palaiologora, the old city, and this is a city that was built on a hill. It's still got about 15 lovely little Byzantine churches, which was built by the inhabitants of Aegina Port, the main city, to escape from the pirates. It was then deserted as everybody came back to the shore after the Ottomans came and suppressed the pirates. It's not to say that they were, incredibly, totally peaceful, but at least the warfare was organised and on a bigger scale. But the rest was on a local basis. You had stability, which gave trade and prosperity. And for many of these places, there was an absolute boom. And in the area under, by the time you get to Suleiman and afterwards, you have traders not only from Venice and Genoa, but the English are in there selling wool and arms. and the French and Dutch, not Spanish, they were enemies. They also threw out most places the Catholics. In the Latin state, Catholics had sort of suppressed and even in some places made illegal the Orthodox Church. Especially those that the states that depended on the Pope for support, because one of the things the Pope wanted to do was to convert everybody to Catholicism. The Venetians, they didn't care so much. They often got into trouble with the popes because they weren't enforcing Roman religion. So, to the benefit of the Orthodox, and there were places where Ottomans were welcomed in to because Ottomans weren't. There were exceptions, obviously, on an individual basis, but they weren't interested in conversion. They weren't interested in making everybody Turkish or Muslim or whatever, as long as you paid your taxes. And I'm sure you know about the millet system in the Ottoman Empire. Well, didn't really come into being until the late 18th century, but this is the idea where the religious leaders of Greeks and Jews and Armenians are controlled by their local, by the leader in Constantinople. This doesn't exist quite now, yet, but still there are the makings of it. The Patriarch and Mehmet get on very well indeed. They have the same kind of relationship that Kirill and Putin have at the moment. They're much better, interdependent and supporting each other. So the Orthodox got back their bishoprics and their parishes and their people, with a few little pockets, like in the archipelago, Naxos, Syros, you still and Tinos, you find Catholic communities, but it's nothing like it. Franks, the Latins, Europe, northern, Western Europeans, basically ejected, and it gave Greeks, Jews, Armenians, and other local communities developed a sense of community within these people, and to some extent fostered this sense of being, for example, Greek, which then developed into such a way that in the 19th century they had a consciousness of being, if not a nation, but an ethnic group. Thank you very much. That's all we have. If you want to read any more, it's obviously in the book, and delighted to show you that. And I hope it hasn't been too confusing. Fact-driven. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It was an absolutely fascinating overview. It was not at all confusing. You explained it so beautifully. But you'll take
Confuses me.
But you'll take a few questions.
Oh, of course.
Who would like to?
Or comments, corrections, contributions.
Please.
Do we know how long this expedition took?
A year.
Only a year.
Well, only a year. You're supposed to be back in 2 months.
Oh, was it?
Normally, if you, I mean, going from London, for example, when you went to the Holy Land in the 14th century, you were only supposed to be away for 3 months. It was very efficient, and there were, he took a long time because he kept on making wrong decisions about which way to go back. I also have a hankering that he was enjoying it. I think he wanted to see these other places. He wanted to go and see the Cross of the Good Thief. He wanted to go to Cyprus. He wanted, He was very dangerous. He said there was several times when he confesses to being terribly frightened and he wished he was back home, etc. But nevertheless, he was either very misguided or he really didn't, he wasn't in a hurry to get back. There is a twist in the tale when he gets back, but I'm not going to, but there's no spoilers.
So I think you were
Sorry?
first, and then we'll go to
Sorry.
that.
I was just wondering what you did for money, because if you plan to go for
Yeah, he took
3
with him
months,
a purse of, I did work it out actually, it was about 3,000 ducats, well it's in here anyway. He calculated, because they knew how much things were going to cost, but they'd been booked. His book is like a travel memoir. There were other books at the same time which were more like Lonely Planet, which told you where to get the boat and how much it would cost and who to ask for, where to go in road, blah, blah, and whether to go to Jaffa or Alexandria. So they had a good idea. They had a good idea how much it would cost and how much it would cost for guides and how much you had to pay the guards when you went into that sort of thing.
but he's got this money on him,
Oh yeah.
so he's
Now,
walking around with...
He's walking around. So what he does, what they do, is they have it in Alexandria. They go to Alexandria, and then they leave half the money with the captain of the ship, of the fleet.
Trusting.
Yeah, trusting is not a sink in the storms. I mean, this is what we're going to get through. And then arrange to the ship will pick them up again in Jaffa. But this doesn't happen. He misses the boat. So he has to find his own way, and he has to beg at some stage. He goes up to when he's in Famagusta, I think. Either Famagusta or Nicosia, I can't remember. He goes up to the bishop and says, after who's saying mass in the cathedral, and he says, "Please, can you help me out?" And the bishop is saying, "I haven't got any money either. You'll have to go somewhere else." So anyway, they were sort of. They get some help from Rhodes. He also meets a couple of mates of his, a couple of people he knows from Naples, who southern.
There was a question here first. So,
Yes, he seems to have been very well received in the Saracen lands, but this was still the era where the Crusades would have been remembered.
Oh, very much so.
How come? A Christian traveller sort of...
Well, it's really interesting. There's all this going on, this energy, but nevertheless people are trading. Boats are coming in. Also, the pilgrims are a source of money. There is one bit, when he goes from Jerusalem to Jaffa, he stays at a place called Ramna. And he's hoping to meet another group of pilgrims who he'd seen going up that way, who he knew. And he daren't go outside because he's constantly being chewed and spat at and things like that. And, what are you doing here? Get out and, carry on your journey. So they were tolerated because of, but if you tried to stay anyway, and they also had, they wanted guards. When he set off across the Sinai, he had, he went in a group with 50 Flemish people, led by a knight who would have been in full armour and with his attendants and things like that. So he always went around with an escort. Nothing really else. Chance to lie.
If you had full armour on in Sinai in August.
roasted, mate. Yeah.
It is very tough people. Even, I mean, nowadays it's not uncommon for short, middle-aged, pot-bellied, short-sighted lawyers to go on trips to the Holy Land or anywhere else. But in those days, and with malaria.
I just wondered, you said that he stayed in Levant for all that time and was fated as a pilgrim, so it sort of picks up on the last two questions. Was that on his way home? Wouldn't that have been
No, this was on his way.
A badge of honour and a way of getting a free meal and a beer out of people, or is that such a
I
thing?
don't know. I imagine actually, and this is pure imagination, I have no evidence for that, that if you've done this trip, he's become, rather, little pot-bellied and short-sighted. By the time he's finished this trip, boy, is he tough. He's tanned, he's got self-confidence, He's got his pilgrim's hat, he can tell you about Adam's tomb, and things like that. Cross suspended, I mean, you know, celebrity.
Is Adam's tomb still there?
I beg your pardon?
Adam's tomb still there?
Well, it is, I think it is. There are 3 of them now.
All the branches that were growing out of his mouth.
Well, that was a tree of Jesse, I think, that was growing out of his
Does he have all
mouth.
his ribs?
No, there was one.
Eagle.
There's one in Jerusalem. There are 2 more somewhere else, because the Orthodox, I think there's one in Antioch, and I think the Muslims have one somewhere. Oh, that's right, there's the cave, the Muslims have something called the Cave of the Patriarchs, where Abraham and the people and Abel and people like that are buried. So he's in them there. But our Adam is. Sorry, yes. Oh, sorry. There's one lovely. Sorry, yes.
It's okay, please. Do we know what sort of stuff he ate, an average meal, and do we know what the language communication between these different communities was, like the lingua franca at the time?
He talks about bread a lot. When he goes to, when he's staying in Rhodes, they're supplied with bread and meat. Yeah, there are 2 meals a day. It's like monastic regime where you have sort of 11 o'clock and 5 o'clock your meal. So the main meal is the first one, about 11 o'clock in the morning, and there you have bread and meat. And then you save the leftovers, you have enough to keep it, then you have for your supper. So the bread is this is the, what else does he talk about? He talks about, they're marooned on some beach in an island on Shrove Tuesday, and they make a carnera, it's called, as in carnival, the carnera meal with fish and other things. Other food? I don't know. Whatever you would. What was the other question?
The language, he communicated with numbers and stuff, yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I have no idea, he doesn't say. It wouldn't have been Latin. Sorry.
You say he was contemporary of Chaucer's?
Yes.
The wife of Bath had 3 times been in Jerusalem. I wonder whether he met her there or not.
Is it rightly, and I think, as I understand from chronology here, this was after the fall of Albrama, the Christian Empire.
After what, sorry?
After the fall of Albrama. That's French.
Yes, absolutely.
Which was the Christian kingdom in the East,
I think,
where the Knights Hospitallers used to look after the pilgrims and take them to the sites and stop brigands attacking them. And the Knights Templars were the military, provided them the fighting force. But then they were chucked out, as you say, by Saladin and the Mamluks.
well, Saladin chucked them out of Jerusalem, then they went to Tyre,
Yeah.
then to Acre.
Acre. There was a
Acre,
small
the
island
fall of Acre.
Ruad, which
right.
was the last island they were on.
Yeah.
Then they were given.
They went to Limassol.
Yeah, they were given Cyprus.
They went to Limassol,
And the Ottomans attacked and burnt all their records. All their history was lost.
Anyway, so they went to Limassol, but and then they left Limassol, and somebody suggested that, I can't remember who it was, it escapes my mind, one of the leaders, whether it was the Venetians or they went to Rhodes. So they besieged Rhodes, it was a bit of a walkover, and then set up their base and sort of carried on the work of protecting the pilgrims.
From there, yes.
But it's interesting, when I talked about when he's in Athens, trying to get west, he can't go because it's too dangerous, so they go to Negropont, to Evia, and they go to this place called Oropos, where there's a castle which is inhabited by Albanians, who they have to avoid, and the castle owned by the Hospitallers. So I don't know what they were doing there, anyway. So they must have had settlements outside. Well, they certainly had settlements all in the other islands, Kos and Castellorizo, and those islands ran roads.
The old castles are still there because the knights were condemned by the Pope, or not the King of France, in a conspiracy. They were condemned as heretics, and Moray was killed in Paris. But of course, it was discovered they were actually innocent because of a document in the papal secret archives was discovered in the early part of the century.
Oh, right.
And they were actually all innocent, and they were all put to death. But they used to provide the security, because I realised that the chronology was this was after that time. But
Yeah, but of course after Rhodes, when the Ottomans finally threw them out, then they went to Malta, where still are.
Another point, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting.
I read a couple of books, one called Paradise Lost about Smyrna, Italy, and the other one was about Salonika, which was a typical Ottoman city. And it really reminded me, you were saying about how the old patriarch and the Jewish leader and the Orthodox leader all looked after their own communities, which they did. The Ottomans allowed them complete freedom, providing they paid the taxes. And it's a bit of a misconception that they were, because they were such a war economy, a war state. But in actual fact, once they provided security, trade flourished, and everybody got on with one another.
Yeah. Well, this is why, in 1823, was it, the beginning of the Greek Revolution, they hanged the patriarch because he had let them down. He just wasn't in charge of his people anymore, and this is, so we'll hang the leader.
And they also hung the Sheikh Islam, the head of the, because he sort of said, no, he's innocent. So it was like they hung both heads at the same time.
Yeah.
But there were rather a lot of Greek people who converted to Islam, so they wouldn't have to pay taxes.
Well, this is true. There was a head tax, the jizya, and it was payable by men between 18 and 40, 18 and 50. But if you were exempt, the other thing they could have done would you were exempt if you joined the army, and you exempt if you were a priest or a monk. That was another way of avoiding the head tax. It's a little argument in favour of the Ottomans weren't interested in suppressing orthodoxy, the religion, because you got a break if you became a monk. Avoided tax.
Can I just ask
Yes,
how you found the manuscript, and if this is the only translation of it, and if it's in Italian, or if this is a unique document that you've now produced?
It's in, right, Martoni wrote it in about a year or so after he got back. It's all fresh in his mind. So it would have been about 1395, 1396. And he gave it to a local dignitary, or in Rocca, who had it copied. And then the original manuscript was lost, but we still had the copy. And that ended up in the Bibliothèque Nationale eventually, in Paris. I don't know how it got to there. And then it was transposed into Latin, into a Roman alphabet, and printed in 1894. So the Cahiers
in Paris.
In Paris, published in 1894 in the original Athens. I think I found a partial French translation, but misses out a lot of it. And I haven't. Well, if I'd have found another English translation, I wouldn't have done this one. And also, if you, I haven't got any here, but if you are a Latin buff, Americans would say, there is an edition I have which has the Latin text as well. That you can get off the internet. And you can check on whether to sort of join. It's fascinating. The Italian was very interesting because I said it was halfway between Latin and and Italian. For example, that in Latin there's no definite article. You know, the table mensa. There is a word in Latin, illa, means that table. Illa mensa, in that table. But by the time Martoni is using it, he's using it as a definite article. So he's not saying that table, which is the table is full, illa mensa. And he's got very often a modern word orders instead of the old Latin word orders. But a lot of work, there were a dozen, at least 20 words. But it was a real problem finding out what they meant, because they weren't in any medieval Latin dictionaries or proto-Latin dictionaries. I found most of them in old Neapolitan dictionaries, and a couple in the Florentine, people who've done dictionaries of Florentine dialect, so we found them there. So it was very interesting from that point of view.
Must have taken you a while.
For the time on hand, what else are we going to do?
I think we should thank our speakers for absolutely.
Thank you.